Can the online people see us now? Are they connected to us? Okay. So let's go ahead and start it. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute, where this is happening face-to-face, but we also have online participants. My name is Suresh Babu. I am a senior research fellow and head of capacity strengthening at IFPRI. And I've been here for a while. I will be the moderator for today for this launch event. IFPRI and I particularly are very happy to host this event and welcome you officially to launch this newest member of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, SEADS, the standards for supporting crop-related livelihoods and in emergencies. We have now about 150 people, is that right, and registered online, and they are connecting with us. And we have about 20 to 25 people here in the room. This is the fourth and final regional launch of SEADS. SEADS held one event in November in Rome at the Food Security Cluster Global Partners meeting. Another one in December, hosted by ICRC in Nairobi. And the third one, and the last one last week in Bangkok, hosted by World Vegetable Center. Through all these events, we have around 300 participants, and we have already have more than 1,000 downloads. That's what I hear of the Handbook. That's wonderful. So we are thrilled to see such an interest in this new tool. I'm particularly interested in SEADS because about 30 years ago, I was asked from Cornell University to go to Malawi, where droughts and kind of famine kind of situation was really looming, and I was asked to go there and help the country. I was called food security advisor. I was very young, and in 1991 we faced a drought. 60% of maize yields went down, and that is real drought famine kind of situation. So I was asked to calculate how much food we need, this basic information. Where should the food go when we get the food? Will we get the food commercially or food aid? Whom should we contact? All this basic information the government was struggling to have, and I was put in the middle of it. And at the same time, we were also asking ourselves, what can the farmers and the rural households can do while we are waiting for the food to arrive? And that's when I thought some kind of this emergency action plan for agriculture would help. And now I see the SEADS document, I realize, wow, this is exactly what we were planning to have at that time, or should have at that time, to work with, right? But of course, we scrambled, we imported some sweet potato, cuttings from Zambia, and all these things to go along in fighting, drought-induced famine conditions. So I'm glad that I'm part of this launch, because this is something that I look forward to in terms of using it. I understand this has been a truly collaborative effort. People coming together, the scientists, experts, NGOs, practitioners on the ground, policymakers, coming together in order to contribute not only to the content, but also commenting on the earlier drafts. And what you see is the final collective wisdom from not only from the literature experience from the past, but also the field tested knowledge that you have. So this is an exciting moment personally for me, and also to look forward to using the manual. But before we go on, a bit of housekeeping. We'll start with our panel today. We'll have 4 speakers lined up who will I will introduce in a moment. As your questions rise as they present, please go ahead and pop them in the Q&A. This is particularly for the people who are online. Do that in Q&A chat session there, and please hold them. If you are in person here, please hold them until we finish the panel presentations. We'll have about 30 minutes at the end to get your questions. Please do not put your questions for the panel in the chat, right? That's a specific instruction we are giving. Don't put it on the chat, but only in Q&A, as we will only be monitoring Q&A questions. Now, I'm delighted to introduce 4 members of this panel, and we have Racey Henderson from SEADS, who is a SEADS coordinator, who will speak first. And we have Morrow in the room. Oh, right, Jan, I should have said hello to you. I didn't see you, sorry, Jan. Agriculture team lead with Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance at USAID. And we have Julie Ideh, Global Technical Director for Agriculture and Livelihoods at CRS. Themba Sibanda, Chief of Party for Activating Markets and Agricultural Livelihoods at Norwegian Refugee Council in Iraq. He is coming to you from Iraq online. So we have also got Aaron Gershowitz here sitting at the back, NRC's Institutional Partnership Advisor here in the room with us, who will say some connecting words to Themba when we come there. But let's start with Racey, who is going to give us more information about SEADS Standards. Racey, please. So you will use this, right? Sure. Yourself.
Thanks, Suresh. Thanks, everyone, for being here. So it's been a real pleasure for me to coordinate the project over the last 3 years with the steering group. We have one member of the steering group here with us today, Themba Sibanda, and a former steering group member, Adam Rydell, here in the office, in the room. So really glad to do that. Also have been supported the whole way by my colleague, Anne Ideh from Tufts, who is the brilliant mastermind behind all of these launch events. So I'm thrilled to share SEADS with you today. So SEADS is a set of evidence-based international principles and minimum standards that support the design, implementation, and evaluation of crop-related responses. It allows you to determine if a crop-related response is appropriate, necessary, and feasible, and it helps you prioritize which crop-related response area might achieve livelihood objectives given the context. It also helps you track alignment of your project with minimum standards and the core humanitarian standards, and provides tools for measuring impact from crop-related crisis response. SEADS is the newest member of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, a collaboration between standards initiatives to harness evidence, expert opinion, and best practices, and to use this knowledge to improve quality and accountability in humanitarian response. SEADS fills a critical gap in humanitarian standards by providing guidance specific to crop production before, during, and after emergencies, and supporting alignment to crop-related responses with the core humanitarian standard. It will be a great companion to other standards. In particular, it complements LEGS, the livestock emergency guidelines and standards, which provides minimum standards on livestock responses, and livestock producers, as you know, also produce crops very often. So why use SEADS? As you all undoubtedly know, around the world, millions of people who are vulnerable to crisis rely heavily on crop production to support their livelihoods. According to the Global Humanitarian Overview for 2023, about 2/3 of refugees and asylum seekers originate from countries with food crises. And by the end of 2022, at least 222 million people across 53 countries were expected to face acute food insecurity. So many of these people produce food for themselves, for their communities, for the food supply chain, and they generate income if they sell food they have produced. During a crisis, crop production and many other associated services that make crop production possible may be disrupted, making it more difficult for people to meet their food and income needs. Many of you have, I'm sure, seen this firsthand. Using SEADS minimum standards in your projects can ensure the best possible programming and keep people from starving, from adopting negative coping mechanisms, and from migrating. Crop-related crisis responses that use SEADS principles and standards offer people assistance that can have sustained livelihood impacts. Response aligned with SEADS principles and standards can help reduce the impact of future crisis, support a more sustainable use of natural resources, and enhance market linkages and viability. So who is SEADS for? Anyone who is involved in crop-related response can use SEADS, but it is most useful for agriculture experts who are unfamiliar with humanitarian principles, programming, and evaluations, or, on the flip side of that coin, humanitarians who are unfamiliar with crops and effective programming to support crop-based livelihoods before, during, and after emergencies. So SEADS covers all types of crops, perennial, annual, and horticulture, and all types of emergencies, rapid onset, slow onset, and complex. To get started with SEADS, first the first 3 chapters, which underpin the SEADS minimum standards and an effective response. These chapters explain the SEADS evidence-based, livelihoods-based, and rights-based approach, as well as the importance of crop-related crisis response to livelihoods. These chapters also introduce the SEADS principles. These principles are fundamental concepts that underpin all crop-related responses and support the best possible programming. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. They build on SEADS evidence-based, rights-based, and livelihoods-based approach and complement the foundations of humanitarian response, Humanitarian Charter, the Protection Principles, and the Core Humanitarian Standard. They do this by highlighting concepts that ensure crop production has livelihood benefits. These principles apply in all humanitarian concepts and should be considered in all types of crop-related responses. The 5 principles are: use livelihoods-based programming, use a participatory approach in all aspects of crisis response, commit to preparedness and early action, consider climate change and minimize environmental impacts, and establish coordinated responses. After the SEADS principles, the handbook goes into the minimum standards and practical tools for initial assessment, 3 technical response areas, and impact-oriented monitoring and evaluation. These minimum standards were selected using an approach focused on evidence, livelihoods, and rights. They are guided by a systematic review of over 250 evaluations of crop-related responses in humanitarian crises, as well as feedback from hundreds of experts around the world during our global public consultation in 2021. The standards are based on a livelihoods approach because crop-related crisis response supports livelihoods, and a rights-based approach that encourages participation, empowerment, accountability, and non-discrimination when delivering crop-related responses. So let's take a look at the structure of each of the standards. Each standard has a qualitative statement, which is the standard itself. It has key actions that are practical steps to help you attain the standard, and guidance notes, additional information to support the key actions in the same fashion. So this structure is the same fashion as other HSP standards. Let's take a quick look at each of the standards. First, we have initial assessment minimum standards that cover timing and team competencies, assessment approach, questions and methods, and response area selection. Tools in this chapter will direct you to choose 1 or more response areas. Then we have SEED and SEED system minimum standards related to assessment and planning, technical options and timing, systems-based assistance, crop and variety choice, and seed quality. The tools, equipment, and other non-SEED input minimum standards mirror those of SEED and SEED systems, directly covering assessment and planning, technical options and timing, services and system support, and choice and quality. So for crop-related infrastructure minimum standards, they cover assessment and planning, technical specifications, location, lifetime, and timing. For each of the 3 response areas, SEADS includes practical tools to help you achieve minimum standards in each area. The first tool that it includes are decision trees, such as this. It also includes timing tables that help you determine when different technical options would be appropriate. They also include tables of disadvantages and advantages of different technical options in each response area. So the last set of standards in the final chapter, last but not least, is the SEADS impact-oriented monitoring and evaluation standards. So these are the first of their kind in HSP, expanding on the key indicators we see in other HSP handbooks and providing minimum standards for participatory approaches, project objectives, process monitoring, indicators, and 2 types of evaluations, end of project reviews and participatory impact evaluation. This chapter also provides tables to support aligning your crop-related response with the core humanitarian standard on the standard on quality and accountability in emergency assistance. Okay, so to wrap up, let's talk about access. How do you get the handbook? Like other HSP minimum standards, we were really focused on inclusion and making access easy. So there's a number of ways you can access it. The easiest way is to get a copy is to download it from our website. We'll place that link in the chat for those of you who are online. You can also view and search SEADS alongside other HSP handbooks in the interactive handbook platform of Sphere. And you can download the HSP app if you want to take SEADS to the field with you. If you're like me and you want a hard copy of the book, you can purchase one through Practical Action Publishing, which is our publisher, or if you're in the room today, we have books for you at the end of the session. So links to all these options are available on our website, and I will pass it back to Suresh.
Thank you, Racey. Yeah, since we have to use a microphone because online participants are listening. Thank you, Racey. Once again, a wonderful overview of the SEADS document itself and also how we can get access to it. Now let me ask Jan to come and give few words about his perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Suresh. Oh dear. Oh, good. I was hoping it wasn't going to just be that picture of me up there the whole time. No, it's great to see so many folks here in the room this morning. You know, we don't have too many in-person meetings going on, so that's really exciting, and great to see so many folks online. Considering this is now the fourth and final of the launches, to still see so many people interested. So that's great. So good afternoon, good evening to all of you that are on there. I did also want to thank IFPRI for hosting us in person here. So thank you, Suresh, for making that happen. And also a thanks to Tufts and Anne and Racey and the rest of the steering committee over these past few years working on pulling this together. I remember when this was first sort of a little kernel of an idea back in OFDA, as it was in those days, and you know, the sort of vision that was coming together, and now to actually see it, you know, in a tangible, actual book, and you know, be able to use that going forward is really quite exciting for me and my team at BHA. As the you know, world's largest humanitarian donor, BHA in USAID, of course, is very excited to be able to you know, develop and commit to these standards and guidelines. As Racey was explaining, you know, this is part of the HSP. It fits in with the Sphere standards, and we've been very pleased and sort of dedicated to making sure that it aligns well with LEGS, because we know, as Racey has already noted, that so many of the programs that you know, our partners and community of practice are implementing with the beneficiaries are integrated in that way. And you know, I think back when I was a field practitioner in my early days in the career, and I see some of my former NGO colleagues here in the room, and we were already reminiscing a little bit earlier. You know, it was an evident gap that there wasn't a particular book or standard or guideline that we could go to for these types of agricultural programs. And you know, you're often talking to each other or asking the cluster, is there a best practice for this, or you know, where do we get information on this? And you know, when we were writing our proposals for funding, it was, you know, we'll pilot this and we'll pilot that, hoping that it was something, you know, that was going to have a decent outcome. And I think what's really exciting for us as BHA is that it's not just an output based process now as we look at these agricultural and crop-based programming, but now we can actually know for certain that the types of projects that we're going to be, we as a donor funding, and you know, all of you as the community of practice implementing with beneficiaries, are based off of solid evidence that we know now that the dollars we're sending are actually going to have the impact that we intend. And so I think that's really exciting for us, you know, as the donor, looking at it from the best bang for our buck perspective. I think I'll stop there and hand back to you, Suresh. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, please take your seat. Thank you. And once again, we'll bring the panels back, as I said, for more questions and interaction with you all online as well as in person. But let me at this stage is Julie Ideh here. Julie, please come. Julie Ideh is from CRS, right? So yeah, I already introduced you before.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm not sure if that might be the notes for the. Is this the script?
Yeah. Would you like to? 1 second.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you. And good morning, everyone, and good afternoon and good evening for those who are online. So I'd also like to thank IFPRI for the invitation to today's session, and to Racey and Anne as well for the work in coordinating. I am most excited about SEADS in what I think it can offer in terms of strengthening coordination of our efforts, especially along the continuum of humanitarian to development programs. I think they really offer a tool for humanitarian and development actors at the country level to work together and collaborate in conducting assessments, in agreeing on programmatic interventions that are going to make sense, engaging with local institutions, and learning together about what is actually achieving the results that we're aiming for. So SEADS, with its livelihood objectives, principles, and standards, creates a common language for all of us to work together in actually sharing data and information, strengthening our preparedness efforts, and strengthening market systems for more resilient livelihoods. So for me, this really offers a renewed opportunity for engaging local institutions. CRS works closely with our Caritas partners and non-church partners in our humanitarian responses, mainly because they are usually in the communities that are most affected, and they are quick to be able to assess the needs and to mobilize resources in response. But we also recognize the important role of local government institutions and market actors in preparedness and coordination to ensure that there are strong systems for enabling resilient livelihoods, again, along that continuum of the response and the development work. So I think SEADS really reinforces for us, again, the localization agenda. And it's calling for participation, it's calling for coordination and preparedness. And so this is really going to help strengthen and sustain these systems. So I see a lot of value in organizations like CRS and other NGOs in introducing SEADS in these coordination platforms and engaging local institutions in building a common understanding and practice of how we can collectively support livelihoods across the humanitarian and development nexus. So SEADS guidance also resonates with CRS's global food crisis strategy. In our strategy, we are looking at both responding to immediate needs as well as defining the medium to long-term investments needed to strengthen food systems. So we're trying to be more intentional about how we do this, about our immediate response and how it's connected to those systems, and where possible, implementing through those systems required for addressing the underlying drivers of food insecurity. So SEADS is going to help our teams do this in 3 ways. Through its emphasis on a livelihoods and market-based response, by encouraging teams to consider climate change and protecting the ecosystem services that are critical to livelihoods, and driving the generation of evidence to contribute to important data and information systems. So firstly, the SEADS principle to have a livelihoods-based response encompasses the importance of market systems for both the formal and informal systems in the immediate response, as well as critical pieces to improve food systems. So in the midst of this crisis that we're all analyzing, we're hearing a lot about the focus on access to fertilizer. However, for a crop-based response, SEADS recognizes the broader needs of households that have agriculture-based livelihoods. The handbook guides responders to assess all the resources critical to production, such as land and water resources, and understanding the pre-crisis market characteristics related to all inputs required for crop production. So for example, CRS has done a lot of work in designing the seed and voucher fare methodology over the last couple of decades. We've really tried to move away from direct distributions into a market-based response. However, this very much has become a bit of a sort of business as usual approach for CRS. So I think with the SEADS Handbook, it gives us this response area identification tool, which really will help responders have a systematic way of addressing what is the most appropriate response and not always just going to a knee-jerk sort of what we're used to. But most importantly, there's a focus on the participatory impact assessments, which will help all responders understand, did that selected response actually create the outcome that we were looking for? So secondly, the SEED principle number 4, we're focused on climate change and environmental impacts. This is also critical to the current food crisis. There has not been enough emphasis on protecting the restoration of land and the ecosystem services that sustain livelihoods over the long term. Our Livelihoods and Landscapes platform has been supporting farming households, communities, and governments to invest in sustainable production and restoring landscapes. And we have evidence that this work increases soil fertility, water resources, and can reduce a community's need for food assistance in a crisis. So again, access to fertilizer is useful, but SEEDS can help responders really make sure that they maintain a focus on healthy soils, even in an emergency response. And finally, the third SEEDS principle that I think is really interesting, especially for CRS, on the focus on preparedness and early action, as well as, again, this focus on participatory impacts, monitoring and evaluation. This really resonates with CRS's interest in data and information systems and how we can strengthen these systems. So we're investing in a number of tools that help us understand the market impacts of different crises and also tracking the shocks and resilience trends among households that are experiencing multiple events. So one of these tools, the monthly interval resilience analysis called MIRA, collects high-frequency data that is shared with communities to empower a localized response. So this is an example of a system that can not only support preparedness and early action, but it's a system that can be strengthened by the SEEDS participatory impact assessments, so we can feed that data back into that system and really understand what's happening as an outcome. So generally, I'm really eager to build the awareness of the SEEDS principles and standards with our country program staff, our local partner staff, and I think it will be especially important to continue to encourage our teams and our colleagues to work in coordination with others when we apply it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. That is wonderful. Let me now go online to Themba. Before I do that, we do have Aaron Gershowitz here, who will connect us to Themba in Iraq. Please, Aaron.
Sure. Thank you so much, Suresh. And good morning, everyone in the room, and good afternoon, evening to all online. We're all, I guess, become used to operating in multiple time zones, so we have to say that each time. I'm new to SEEDS and to the whole agricultural area, so not able to comment on that at all, but would just like to express the representing the Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC's office here in the US. I'm very pleased to represent the organization at this event to launch SEADS Standards. NRC has long recognized the importance of developing common standards for the implementation of humanitarian assistance to ensure the quality and consistency of humanitarian work in so many diverse and challenging contexts. We have worked closely for many years with the other standards bodies, including Sphere and my education colleagues working with INEE. So we certainly recognized when the SEEDS was proposed that this would be, that we would like to take an active role in the development of these standards. And we have been involved, starting with my colleague, Thomas Odholm, in our headquarters since 2019. We're looking forward, of course, to work closely with the SEADS team, with USAID, other partners throughout the world to implement these standards in our programs and to disseminate them widely to other humanitarian workers. My colleague who will be presenting today, Themba Sibanda, has been closely involved in the development of these standards since he joined the steering group in 2021. He was invited to join the team to present a very much of a field-based approach because of his wide field experience. He's currently the chief of party with NRC's Activating Markets and Agricultural Livelihoods project in Iraq, and he has more than 20 years of experience in emergency agricultural programming, food security, and livelihoods on a global scale. He's worked in Africa, Asia, Middle East, Americas, and Eastern Europe, so it looks like everything but Australia. So he definitely has that perspective from throughout the world. His education was in agriculture with honors in crop science, and also has a MBA and a BA in development studies. So bringing that wide knowledge, I introduce Themba to the group. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Please, Themba, go ahead. Can you connect us and continue to talk?
Hello. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Themba. We can hear you here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so from the practitioner's point of view, SEADS is a good companion for developing, implementing, monitoring crop-related responses. As we all know, any emergency in the developing world degenerates into a food security emergency. And it is important that we confront these challenges related to food security in the third world through tools such as SEADS. So for us as practitioners, I think this is a step in the right direction. So for NRC, we see this as a very good tool for improving program quality. You know, for a long time, as mentioned by others, the quality of the program dependent on the managers or staff who are in that program without an globally accepted tool such as SEADS. So I think this has come at the right time, and it will help us even to standardize the crop-related responses within our organization and across the humanitarian world. We will be using a set of acceptable standards which have been tested across different contexts in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. We see this as a key referral document for program development. In many cases, when we develop proposals, we lacked, especially for the crop-related responses, we lacked a document such as this, which we can refer to. Now that this is in place, it will be easy for us to make reference to these standards, knowing pretty well that these are universally accepted standards. We see it as key in the sense that it also emphasizes on the evidence-based learning. So this also gives us an opportunity to push for more investments in evidence-based learning, as we believe this will actually help us to improve the quality of our programs that we are implementing and those that we plan to implement in future. From here, with the launch of the SEADS standards, NRC has developed an action plan of how we are going to make use of the SEADS standards. Starting with the proposal development, from now onwards, all crop-related proposals will be guided by SEADS, right from assessments, implementation, throughout the stages of the project cycle. SEADS is also quite key in making decisions during emergencies. In many cases, practitioners struggle when they are trying to make decisions about which response will be appropriate and which one is feasible. with the tools we have, such as the decision trees in the SEADS Handbook, it will be easier for practitioners to be guided and to come up with the most viable option through using SEADS and the tools that are part of the standards. SEADS is also an important monitoring tool for tracking the alignment of projects to the minimum standards, as well as the M&E tools that are part of the SEADS standards. These will be adjusted to ensure that we can effectively monitor the activities that we are implementing related to the crop related activities. Now, in terms of measuring impact of the crop-related crisis, we see SEADS as being key to guide both project managers and the M&E people in terms of coming up with a good, aspects of evaluation and monitoring that will identify the key issues in programming that show impact of the activities that we have been implementing. We are also monitoring a number of activities that we have been implementing, mostly around the construction related, the infrastructure that is related to crop related. So the infrastructure that supports crops in Iraq, for example, we are looking at irrigation, which without irrigation, we know here this is a desert. It's almost impossible to produce crops. So what we are doing is we have SOPs which guide the teams who implement infrastructure-related projects. Now, as NRC, one of the starting points is to align these SOPs to the SEADS standard, looking at assessments and planning, looking at technical specifications of the activities that are infrastructure-related, like irrigation canals, looking at the location, the lifeline, and then the timing of such activities. So these SOPs will be realigned with guidance from the SEADS standards. And this process has already started and will continue until we have fully aligned our SOPs. Now, one of the key activities that we already focus on with the guidance from SEADS is the training. We want to train implementation teams to ensure that they are aware of the standards and that they apply them appropriately. We know sometimes it's difficult to interpret reading these books. It might be difficult for some of the people to understand the standards, especially in some cases where we have issues with the language and stuff like that. So what we are doing is to do trainings, to roll out trainings, targeting key stuff. And then we are also looking at our partners who are supporting us with implementation of the projects. We want also our partners to make use of these standards. Like I mentioned earlier, that we want to standardize the operation, both from within NRC and those activities that are being implemented by partners. One example that we have in terms of training and alignment of our activities to SEADS is the SEADS system strengthening project that we have in Ramadi in Iraq. So for this project, we are already aligning the approach so that we are using the SEADS standards to guide the analysis of the SEADS system. We are also looking at building staff capacity, training them, especially on the minimum standards 5.1 to 5.5, which relate to SEADS system strengthening, as well as strengthening the project on SEADS systems so that it's fully aligned with SEADS. From the SEADS system analysis right up to the variety choices of the SEADS. There is emphasis on community participation, and these are the issues that we want to learn from SEADS and apply on the ground to improve the impact of our crop-related responses as NRC. Thank you.
Thank you, Themba and Aaron, for from NRC perspective, and also as a committee member. Thanks, Themba, for presenting your views. And let me now ask the panel members to come and join us on the podium here on the seats. We'll start the question and answer session. Please, Julie, Ian, and Racey. Yeah, do we have, let me ask the online participants to go ahead and have your questions on the question and answer session of the online, in the online chat area. But before we start, I have my own set of questions. Maybe it's been a wonderful morning in terms of looking at different perspectives and also what the contents of the seeds and how we will be using them as we go along. But Jan, you come from a donor perspective, as you said, and you are looking at it at the seeds and standards as a primary aid in kind of guiding your programming. Particularly, how do you see that the current programs on the ground and also the future programs that you are thinking about funding, adapting to this kind of standards? If you can use the mic, yeah, please, yeah.
Thank you, Suresh.
Can you see if the green light is on?
Oh, now it's on, sorry, yes, technology. No, thank you, Suresh. Just before I answer that, I also wanted to give a big shout out to Andy Catley, who's not with us today in person, but I see he's on the screen. So thank you very much, Andy. It's been great working with you over the past couple of years as well. And in terms of how BHA is looking to adapt our programming, there are several things that we've been doing. One, as I think has been mentioned several times by the different speakers, is the alignment between SEADS and LEGS. And so we've already started, even just on our team, each of the technical advisors now will be able to be completely conversant in both of those types of standards, so that we're not looking just at each of the applications and proposals from, separate, well, this is the livestock piece and that's just the crop piece. So even having all of our advisors completely conversant in the standards of both, I think will be helpful, and that's one of the things that we're doing. Of course, we have our emergency application guidelines from BHA. As those get updated, we will be incorporating the SEADS links the same way as we have with LEGS and any of the other standards. And just from another sort of practical example of how what Julie had mentioned earlier about the infrastructure, the natural resources and the ecology, and Themba mentioned the infrastructure within the TPQ office, the Technical Program Quality Office. The three teams that make up the Food Security Livelihoods Division encompass all of those different areas. So we're looking at ensuring that our infrastructure team is also applying the same standards, especially when it's related to agricultural programming, as what's in the SEADS booklet. Over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll keep the mic with you there among the panelists. Let me now move to Themba. Themba, you're still online, right? Yeah, Themba, now you talked about how to work with the national systems, national ministries. Particularly, we would like to kind of know, just to extend your presentation you had in terms of how are you creating awareness among the policymakers or the ministries of agriculture, for example, that you are working with, and then program and strategy development specialists, in order for them to know what is in the content, what is the content of the SEADS manual, and also how you are thinking about working, particularly start with Iraq and other countries that you worked with. What is the scenario there? How can we take this from that perspective?
Okay, thank you. So what we are planning to do here in Iraq is we are planning to set up meetings with the Minister of Agriculture. From here, the Deputy Minister is quite key in all this. Is both technical and elite in terms of the policy. So we want to present the standards to the government and show them that this is the direction that we are taking as the humanitarian community. Once that is done, hopefully we can then also get copies of the handbook. We know sometimes getting these resources within government is difficult. So we share the copies of the handbook with them. And then once we have marketed the seed at the highest level, then we will work with our teams on the ground in different provinces, governorates, to ensure that they share the guidelines also with the directorates of agriculture at the lower level, so that they are aware of these guidelines. One thing which we also want to do is to train our teams as well as members of the food security working groups, as well as the livelihood working groups, so that they have the standards, they have the book either downloaded or printed from internet, and this will help us at least reach those on the ground, the people who are behind the action, so that they have the resource, they can refer to it, and they make use of the book on a day-to-day basis. So this is the approach that we are planning to take also globally within NRC, starting by training our practitioners, sharing with them the resource, which is the book and the links. And then from there, they will approach the national government, ministries of agriculture, and explain how these standards work, so that they have access to the book and they can make use of it.
Thank you, Themba. We'll stay there for us, Themba. We will come back to you as more questions come in. Now let me move to this room here. Just to Racey, you talked about how various actors and players came together. It was a consultative process, and of course the constituencies and institutions have their own perspective on how to approach the crop emergencies. How were you able to bring them all together and different perspectives and different views, and then accommodate that in the context of preparing guidelines? Could you give us some kind of insight from that perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Suresh. It was actually, from our perspective, from SEADS' perspective, the inclusivity of all the voices that we heard during the development is actually something that we were intending to make the book more useful, more realistic, more based in reality that all of our organizations that we worked with have. The context, of course, across the world is extremely different, not just organizationally, but in every place that there's a farmer, there's a different type of farm from 1 kilometer to the next. So that diversity and bringing that diversity into the creation of the standards, we hope you will see that there is that diversity actually makes it more useful. So really in the inclusivity, that was a key part. Also, I think there's an aspect of standards that we often confuse standards with being very rigid. And in fact, standards allow and SEADS encourages a flexibility and a focus on analysis of context, analysis of situations, analysis of your own organization and how you can apply it. So we really feel that the standards set a bar that allow you to see the best way to implement it for your particular organization and for each farmer's context.
Thank you, Racey. That's very useful to know. Julie, moving on to you. You talked about agro-ecosystem as one of the principles, and we worry about that because in the context of fertilizers, particularly if you don't have chemical fertilizers that are readily available, we need to build this soil system and the natural resource base for emergency crop production. Now, in the context of degradation, soil degradation, it happens over time. There is a long-term perspective. All of a sudden, emergency comes, and how do we get this long-term effort in a short-term kind of thing? Just a confusion for the people who are thinking about how do we get the soil fertility right up back to normal within a 1-year period where emergency hits are. In the context of emergency, give us some insights from there.
Yeah, thank you, Suresh. Yeah, we often think we know that land restoration is a multi-year long-term effort, and a lot of our development programs have generated this evidence that I mentioned in terms of increasing water sources and soil fertility. So even CRS, we're struggling with this question of, well, what can you do in the short term in a 1-year emergency response project that can still support land restoration. We actually have an interesting experience in the dry corridor of Central America, where we have been able to introduce just an introduction of some of those practices to those short-term projects, BHA projects. The important key thing, so it's an awareness raising of the participants of the program and the community members, but a key aspect of that experience has been the linkages with whether it's government extension or other systems that are kind of picking up from that introduction and that beginning of that process. So we're learning a little bit about that in that area. In Niger, we're also looking at how we can expand land restoration efforts to a conflict-affected area, because we know in even unstable or fragile contexts, that's going to be a challenge. How can you introduce land restoration where there's conflict? But I think the key thing about SEADS is that it forces responders to think about it. It's creating that standard, that principle. We need to consider what we can do in this context and make the linkages to the long-term efforts. And more importantly, with the participatory impact assessments, it can help us start generating evidence around what can we do in crises in short term that actually does contribute to the long-term land restoration.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julie, for that. Let's now come back to the room here in person, and we'll take some questions from here. Raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll balance it between the online questions and in person from this point onwards. We have a hand up there at the back. Please introduce yourself, where you are from, who you are, and then ask the question.
Jacob Watson with World Vision. And so the question, it's more for Julie just based on what you're saying, but I would like for the other panelists as well. So you talked a bit about localization and how this can fit into a localization strategy. So maybe just expand on that a little bit more, and then thinking how we can be proactive in getting this information out to LNGOs and partners and things like that, and then reflecting that capacity in our partners.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I think there are a number of ways, and actually you probably need to be doing it at a number of different levels. Of course, the easiest is, where we're working with local partners, we can introduce the tools and sort of take them through the training. But I think the critical aspect is the integration into those coordination mechanisms at the national levels as well as at the kind of local district levels. First of all, making sure our local partners are involved in those coordination platforms, but that we're using SEADS standards as a sort of tool within those coordination platforms. So, our local partners are actually benefiting from the application of the handbook along with other actors. So I think it sort of goes in two hands like that.
Okay, there is one more hand. Thank you, Julie.
I'm going to jump in with an online question first because it's related. Yeah, it's actually quite related.
Yeah.
The question is, how feasible is it for smaller organizations to put these standards into practice? What is the staff and financial burden of implementing them?
Whom do you think that it should go?
I think probably for Racey, yeah.
Okay. Great question. Well, I think this also relates a little bit back to what I said in terms of standards and what they are. Let's think about standards versus SOPs. We do have the word standard in standard operating procedure, but the minimum standards that are here are not standard operating procedures. So in terms of the costs of implementing them or how a small versus a large organization could implement, it leaves flexibility up to you to try to achieve the standard. So it's more of a process of considering your resources that you have, considering how you can be best placed in what ways and what specific standards to try to reach. You might try to reach certain standards sooner than you try to reach others because you're already on that path and have resources for that. But minimum standards it's like we're seeking to attain them versus a set of standard operating procedures that says when you're doing this, you have to do this. So we are, in terms of the cost or how a small organization can do it, it's going to vary just as much as your projects vary across small to large organizations. It's just going to be a huge variation there. For smaller organizations, I think take a look at the standards. Like I said, in terms of what are you already working on and what is already a priority for your organization, and how can you capitalize on a direction that you're already heading to make best use of those dollars that you already have in place. If you don't have the ability to make massive changes, see what you can take steps towards achieving. Ideally, we would all be achieving all of these minimum standards. They are minimum standards. They are not maximum standards, right? This is the minimum that we want to be achieving in our crop-related responses. So it's a continuum. Seek to achieve the minimum. If you get to the minimum, great, keep going. And that the resources it takes to get to those is going to be different across organizations and contexts.
Could I just add a couple comments to that? I just wanted to build on that by saying, again, it goes back to the question of coordination, that an organization shouldn't have to implement the SEAD standards alone, that if you are building them into the coordination mechanisms, the same way we do joint assessments in the event of a crisis, we can really pool the respective resources and capacities from across, the pool of actors. And that way, I think local organizations can access resources in order to apply the standards.
Okay, so let's take a question from the audience here.
Thank you. My name is Saad Taha, Save the Children, Senior Advisor for Evidence and Learning. I am a farmer by DNA, not education, being an Nilotic and Nubian. So I'm very excited with what you did, and it is a great effort. In business, they say there is a long business tail. It means that there is a lot of opportunity for evolution and doing more. I feel that one of the challenges of the standards is always about awareness, not about knowledge change or behavior change or practice change. So I believe there is an opportunity that we mainstream this standard, and we need to think about how ISO do things. For example, you have lead implementer and then you have lead auditor. SEAD built to last. It will stay for a long time. It is not just a buzzword that people. It will be as the earth exists. It is very critical. So we need to think about the long business tail, how we make sure that we mainstream it. Also, I feel the 9 ministries, local actors need to have such type of capacity. Even we need to think about educational system, because I believe that students at agricultural college or in crisis and prevention college need to be aware about and have knowledge, not aware only, have the knowledge to deal, especially in vulnerable countries. So I will appreciate to know your thought about that, and what is the next round of revision? Do you have feedback log, and is it planned to be revised after 3 years, 5 years? Last is the importance of collection of local knowledge. It's very critical. My ancestors are farmers, and sometimes they give me a prediction like, a looking crystal ball, So local knowledge is very critical to capture also. Thank you.
Thank you. Racey, you want to start that?
Sure. So in terms of the relevance of SEADS over time, I think is what you're saying. Let's make sure that it stays relevant and continues to learn from its application in the field. And many HSP standards have been revised over time. SEADS does follow very closely the LEGS process, and LEGS has been around for about 15 years and has been revised. I think it's going into its 3rd edition of revision. So certainly revisions are hoped for in the future and would be planned as possible. Currently, there is a very great functionality on the interactive handbook platform, which is where all the handbooks are for HSP. And you can actually create an account, and you can comment at any time on any handbook about any part of it that is or is not relevant to you. So that tool is currently not used a lot. It's very new, but it is a tool that you have at any point to essentially say to the whole humanitarian community, not just me, because you can send me your feedback anytime you want to, but you can say to the whole humanitarian community, this aspect is really off the mark, or this aspect had this great impact for us, and your comments will actually be visible publicly. So that type of ongoing feedback mechanism is available immediately for any of the HSP handbooks. So that's the most concrete way in the short term that we will collect feedback. In terms of local knowledge and feedback as SEADS is being used, we have a number of field teams that have been with us throughout the development of the standards. And those field teams are just our teams from different NGOs who are doing on the ground implementation and who have fed back to us at each stage of the process. We've come to them with questions and we've said, how does this apply to your context? So touch points of, is this relevant? In a future phase, we would hope to expand those field team members, sort of like focal points, so that we could continue to learn from them. The ability for a local organization, whether it's a government agency, or a very local small implementer to be part of that process, we would be thrilled with that. So that is another option. SEADS does not have a global team itself. We rely on our partners and stakeholders to tell us, hey, we've got a team in the field that would love to volunteer a couple hours a month to participate in discussions and feedback. So we do rely on our partners for that to some extent. Thanks for the question.
Okay, any more? There's an online question there.
Yeah, I have a couple of related questions from online, so I'll ask one of them. There are several that are similar. How does NRC or CRS, or others can also pitch in here, how do you intend to socialize SEADS throughout the emergency agriculture program globally? It's always a challenge with standards, extending their use and adoption across countries and programs and various administrative levels from field to HQ.
Yeah, maybe CRS perspective would be good to start with. Maybe we can go.
And then maybe we can get Themba in too.
Others who are in the room can also add. Go ahead,
Thank you. So yeah, we've already started small. Racey had just, we have several communities of practice. So Racey presented the SEADS handbook and standards to our agriculture and livelihoods community of practice. We've had some preliminary discussions between myself and our more kind of development-oriented technical department with our humanitarian response department to say, okay, we need to talk to each other about how we start to socialize these standards within our agency, because obviously during a crisis it's going to be critical for our HRD colleagues to be reinforcing the use of the standards. But really in our country programs, it tends to be, those livelihoods, food security staff will be involved in both humanitarian and development. So the next key thing will be, we've ordered some of the manuals. We're going to integrate that into some of our trainings and orientation of our agriculture and livelihood staff as well.
Very good. Any more questions? Okay, there is a hand there. If you can have the mic. Yeah, keep raising your hand.
Thank you. These seeds and lakes are expected to complement each other. So a lot of experiences from lakes probably has gone it. Is there, like I was concerning, how effective has the implementation of, I know it has gone through several edition revisions. It has been around for some time. Is there any like comparison of pre and post lakes in terms of impact of using and not using these guidelines? And were those learnings adopted while preparing these seeds? And are there agencies, how widely is these lakes being used across humanitarian agencies? And are they, it has been quite a long time, are there any governments that have made lakes, they have adopted lakes as their standard practice? And that probably CRS and NRC are implementing these programs across. I think they might share some learning on the lakes implementation. And
good question. Can you introduce yourself? I don't know.
I'm Srinivas Gautam. I'm from University of Notre Dame Poultry Institute.
Thank you, Srinivas. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe we all should reflect on it. Anyone to take, Racey?
I'm actually going to see if can we get Andy Catley to Andy is the principal investigator for SEADS. He leads the SEADS project. He's also been on the LEG steering committee for 15 years, and I believe he's online. So I would like to send that to him because I can talk about how SEADS learned from the LEGS process, but I think he can speak to the whole question if it's possible to.
Is Andy online? Can we check?
He
Just
was. Is he still there?
Hello, can you hear me?
There he is.
Ah, there he is. Okay, please go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try and respond to the question about legs. I think firstly the question is, has legs had any impact? Do you see any difference in projects or programs where legs is implemented versus not implemented? Well, like SEADS, legs is based on the available evidence, and we conducted a big evidence review, and there was fairly strong evidence on the livestock side that if you used certain practices and followed certain processes for a livestock project, then you would indeed achieve a strong livelihoods impact. Whereas if you didn't do that, if you didn't follow that pathway, there was a high risk that those impacts would not be achieved. And in going through that process, we identified certain practices that were commonplace and perhaps even institutionalized on the livestock side that we were able to say, well, you shouldn't actually be doing this. There's very little evidence to support it. And if you look at it in terms of its technical plausibility, it's weak. So that was the general experience, really, of the LEGS project, and continues to be so, I think, over many years. There has been huge uptake and interest in LEGS, which has grown over time. I don't have the figures to hand, but a number of donors use it as a reference point, which means that it's used as a reference point in proposals. And so on. Exact numbers are quite difficult to actually gather in terms of, who's actually using it or not, because of the, the huge variety of organisations and contexts that we work in. You mentioned government, I think. Has LEGS been incorporated into government? In different ways, I think, because some governments refer to humanitarian standards in their disaster management policies or equivalent policies. Some governments have more specific livestock guidelines for disasters. Ethiopia is an example where the Ministry of Agriculture published national guidelines on livelihoods-based interventions in pastoralist areas, which very much mirrors the LEGS approach. And I think LEGS is actually having much more of a concerted effort now to integrate these standards into government policies. But that, of course, is a very complex job, because each government has its own policy environment and policy structure related to disaster management and humanitarian response, or different agencies exist in government. So now those are a few thoughts and experiences from LEGS. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That's useful as we go forward with SEADS and how we can learn from the LEGS use and outreach and advocacy of use of LEGS in the national systems, particularly on the livestock side. Take a look at, it's a one way to look at it. You've given some insights, at least for me, to take a look at what are the strategies and policies on the livestock side that the governments which face frequent droughts have, and how LEGS have been kind of incorporated in that, and how the implementation comes out of it. So it's a good question, good answer. We'll follow it up in the context of SEADS. Any more questions online, please?
I think actually Themba wanted to jump in, I think, a little while ago. Themba, did you have something you wanted to add to one of the questions?
Themba, please.
Oh yes, this is related to the question on legs. Yeah, my own experience, I did a restocking program way back in 1999 when there was no legs. And yeah, we learned a lot of things from that restocking program. I would say 40% of the livestock we distributed died, mostly because we didn't have any standards to guide us. Now, when I look at legs and reflect, I always say if legs was there at that time, we would have done the program differently. Now, when I look at what we are doing now within NRC, if ever you mention livestock, then we want to see mention of legs. We want to see that our staff have read the guidelines and they are using the guideline during implementation to avoid situations whereby you end up losing some of your investments simply because you didn't follow the guides which have been tried and tested in different contexts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Themba. You have any more online?
I do. I have
another 7 minutes to go, so if you can.
Okay, great. So this question's for Racey. I think it's a pretty quick one. Will there be trainings provided by SEADS?
Great question. We do have hope that in the future we will be able to roll out a series of trainings, both the training of trainers globally, as well as courses for donors or government agencies at a higher level who aren't implementing. And just to also piggyback a little bit on the previous question, we did learn from LEGS that getting smaller local organizations to adopt standards is quite difficult if we rely on a training of trainers approach, where we train the trainers and then they, in order to stay certified as LEGS or SEADS trainers, need to go out and do trainings themselves. They often will do that for organizations that can pay them, which makes a lot of sense. So, or for whom they're already working with. So we also plan to have a series of direct trainings for local organizations. So we hope to have that in the second phase. So not just a training of trainers, but training of directly from SEADS to local organizations to ensure that that localization happens and that we can get feedback, because throughout in the training, of course, we'll learn a lot about what is very easy to then implement and what isn't. So we will get feedback from the trainings of the local organizations as well. So we do hope to do those trainings in the future. We are currently waiting on funding. So for the moment it won't be this year. It won't be this year.
Okay, one more question in the audience here, please.
Hi, I'm Amy Ostrander from the Famine Early Warning System. So no longer on the implementer side, but a question from my past implementer self. I can foresee that a lot of responses would require engaging with multiple standards, right? So you may have instances where you're looking at agriculture and livestock and market-based responses, and that could be either overwhelming or confusing for your implementation team and your design team. So do you have recommendations for how teams might engage with and integrate multiple standards at the same time, especially if they're looking at 3 or more?
Racey, you can take it, or I can even ask Jan. You said LEGS and SEADS should work together. Maybe you should help us a little bit with that. Yeah.
Okay, I was also going to say Themba can give us the real world perspective afterwards. But the intention when developing SEADS, the intention was to not duplicate and to ensure cross-references where it was really relevant. This is particularly true for anything related to markets and SEADS. So MERS already exists, the minimum economic recovery standards, that already exists. We did not want to duplicate that. We did not want to duplicate anything that was in LEGS. So there's a lot of cross-references in SEADS. I think where the real the real challenge of integrating and using all of them comes is in the assessment stage, right? If each of these has different ways that you assess, which one do you use? We also SEADS hopes to address that in future phases by creating a joint assessment tool with LEGS in particular. potentially also with MERS, like including them, so that at the assessment level, there's at least indication of how to make sure you're aligning your assessment such that you're going to get answers that help you achieve all of those minimum standards. So I'll stop there for that. I don't know if Jan or Themba want to add anything.
Yeah, maybe Jan, you tell us a little bit about how just to combine legs and seats, and we'll worry about those other things as we go along. But
yeah, sure. Actually, I don't have too much more to add to Racey. She did that quite well. But as I noted earlier, even from the donor side, the NDHA, we're expecting all of our advisors on the agriculture team to be conversant in both. We know that our partners, most of us on the team having been field implementers in the different NGOs for many years, it's the ag program manager or livelihoods program manager that's doing all of this anyway. So it's not that they would go out and do a legs assessment and then a seeds assessment and then a MERS one. It really should be integrated. How some of those pieces come together, we're not, I think as a community of practice, aren't quite sure about. I think CRS has some good examples how they're beginning to pull together these pieces because they've recognized some of these challenges in doing that. But SEADS we tried very, very strategically to make sure that we could align as much as possible with legs. And that was very intentional from our perspective, because we know that most of the beneficiaries that we're working with are integrated programming already. They are smallholder farmers that have some animals and have crops. Even the pastoralists grow other crops. So make sure that it was well thought through from the beginning. We haven't quite reached there yet, and it is a good question though. Themba, over to you.
Themba,
Okay, thank you.
Say something about the integrated approach here with several standards.
Yeah, thank you. I think, one good thing is that legs came far much earlier than seeds. So many of us are now familiar with legs. Now is the time to move on and familiarize ourselves with seeds. I think that also helps. But in reality, when you are developing an integrated program, I think when you look at seeds and legs, for example, it's important for agriculturalists to be familiar with both. They complement each other. They don't necessarily, seeds does not necessarily repeat things that are already on legs. And then when you design assessments, for example, in the field, people tend to also specialize. Our tools tend to be, for example, if I want to do even an integrated assessment, I will have sections focusing on crops. That's where seeds comes in. I will have a section for livestock. That's when legs comes in. I will have another section on the economic situation. That's where the minimum economic recovery standards come in. So while it becomes probably difficult for the practitioners, I think on the ground, there isn't really much confusion because each standard focuses on a certain area, which certain people collecting data maybe, for example, in an assessment, specializing in that particular area. I think so far it should work well.
Thank you, Themba. And I think we are close to coming. And now we have a session quickly on getting interactions, getting feedback from the participants. Before I turn it over to that kind of voting from the participants, just to summarize, there are a lot of issues that have come out it's very difficult for me to summarize everything, and I don't intend to do that. But outstanding issues are, what are the evidences before we go forward? What kind of evidences out there? How do we dig for evidences? How do we get the evidences out so that not only standards that are there, even though they are minimum, they can be applied with the informed evidence-based application. So that's something that's coming out very clearly. And that requires a collection of data, collection of information as people implement programs, tracking them and using them, probably in the form of case studies, for example, different contexts, different conditionalities, different agro ecosystems, and different types of emergencies that we face, right? So that's something coming out very nicely. And just talking about how to integrate our standards, maybe as we think about building capacities, we should be already thinking about how to integrate this standards, because they're all out there already, but maybe an integrated approach to building capacities, maybe just my own thought here, but that's seems to be very useful once you develop the SEADS capacity, legs capacity. At least that's what I'm getting from Themba, that when you actually are on the ground, people have in their assessments one paragraph about their own aspects of it, but then when you combine it, you want to have an integrated approach to implementation or designing the programs. And socializing these standards become very important, and that requires knowledge sharing, awareness raising, and also a little bit of reaching out to the policymakers, and that to show that the standards are here. When you come up with livestock policy, an emergency policy or disaster policy, please consider this and in your own context and so on. That's one of the things that's coming out. And we mentioned about also curriculum. How do we develop the future humanitarian response workers and also professionals on the ground, to include them already well-trained coming to the field. That's something that's useful. Indigenous knowledge was mentioned, local knowledge, contextualization, and also taking this to the context. And Racey mentioned several times that it is not standard operating procedure, it is minimum standards to follow. I mean, that's a good message, at least for me, and build on it and in the context of, but then that again requires, how can we build? How do we develop evidence on different contexts? And people are already working on the ground. The last point I want to make is that something that I've been involved in is climate resilient agriculture, climate smart agriculture. There is a lot of innovations that are coming out, but needs to be taken to the field. And how does that compare with the emergency responses that we are talking about? And how do we combine that in the context of shocks that we face? So with that, let me stop here and turn it over to our colleagues. You want to go for the voting? So please, all of you who are online as well as in the room, please take your social media equipment that you have, device, and go to the website called menti.com. Some of you maybe are already familiar with menti.com, and use the code that's 59079857. I will give you a minute to get into the system for you, and we want to just get the feedback in terms of what you think. So we have a question here. Just get in, and if you have a second device for you to use it, that's also useful, so you can observe the results while you are using the first device. The scale goes from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And the question is, how likely are you or your organization to use SEADS in your work? It's a very simple, basic questions. And it is 4.4 so far. Yeah, very high score. They are likely to use it. Strongly agree. The average is the one that we are seeing. Some people go less, some people go more, and so on. Is it okay to move to the second question? Yeah, using this device that you have in your hand. And the second question is why? To guide our partners in the project design and humanitarian livelihood assistance, the standards are critical. However, socializing, they're writing this answers that are coming up. Standards are critical, however, socializing them across a large organization and partners will be a challenge. We talked about that already. Appropriateness, that's the context issue, right? Local context, local. Someone is saying we have socialized SEADS in our team during its development. Very good. Better inclusion of local agency. Wonderful. So there are several issues, several whys, there is answers to why coming up. We'll give a few minutes for folks to type it in, and maybe that will be useful for us as we collect these answers and pull them all together. So let's close this now. We are coming to an end of this launch session. Let me first of all say that Racey talked about how do you get these standards for you. There are some copies out there. If you want to take, I'm not sure how many copies, but it should be enough for all of us in this room, I think. Take one per organization. And if you want more, you can always go to the SEADS website and download the free PDF. Let's say that we all read and use SEADS as we go along in our organizations and our programming efforts. But at the same time, keep in mind the issues that are coming up, and we need to work towards revisions and giving the feedback. Racey